This is Bryan Chapell talking with Michael Bullmore and David Helm, and we've been talking in a previous segment about identifying preachers for pastoral ministry. And now, having identified, we want to talk about how do you train these fellows for the work ahead. Now, Mike, you've done it in a seminary setting, you've done it in a pastoral setting. How are you trying to help those that you've identified move on to next steps?
Yeah, I am so thankful for the setting now, because as much as the seminary setting is calculated, to train preachers, you get now to model. And of all of the obvious things, providing opportunities and coming alongside and evaluating, I think the most profound way to train a minister of the gospel is to be a good minister of the gospel. The most profound way to teach guys to preach gospel-centered, Bible-based, Christ-exalting sermons is to preach that way. And
now, in your church, is it like medical school, see one, do one? I mean, do you do sermons and then you say to seminaries, you do it now?
There's some of that, but it's the accumulated effect, I trust, over time.
And would your people allow them to be preaching from the pulpit to the congregation, or are you expecting to happen in a high school classroom, on a youth retreat? How are you giving them opportunities?
Yeah, all of those settings, not until they come to a level of having demonstrated an ability, a competence, if we can use that word, will they stand in the pulpit on Sunday morning.
Mike, one of the things that you mentioned, putting modeling forward. It reminds me of more is caught than taught. Fact is, while God raises up preachers and teachers and pastors, they're trained. They're taught. It's not just caught. No, this idea of a modeling thing that we all come along and walk. So I just want to also emphasize the other side of it is, what are we actually doing with them?
Yeah, I don't want to minimize that.
You said evaluate too.
I don't want to minimize either one of those, the evaluation or the training. I'm just saying underneath that, there has got to be, I think in Perkins' Art of Prophesying, he says to ministers, there's a chapter called The Scarcity of Ministers. He says to ministers, honor your calling so as to attract others to it. And I think about that responsibility. Think about what affected you, Dave. What trained you in the ministry? I know the primary training for me was listening to other preachers.
Now, when I was in seminary, now this is going to be terrible. When I was in seminary, my first year, I took over the pastor of a church. So, to my horror, I look back and look at some of those sermons. But now, to, again, press you all a little bit, I was doing it as a way of learning. Now, I had a very forgiving congregation, and they needed a pastor there because they couldn't afford the full-time guy anymore. So, I was the desperation measure. But at least it was very helpful for me if it wasn't for them.
Enormous. And to have a guy alongside of you, here's the ideal situation: doing it and having an older mentor, observing, evaluating, and now saying, here's how we grow, next step, do this concrete thing, the training part that you're talking about.
Do either of you train your congregation
Absolutely.
to do pastoral evaluation or sermon evaluation?
I don't want to hear from my entire congregation on my sermons.
A team.
But there's certainly people that I need to be hearing from, and I'm certainly open and should be to that.
Stott talks about having that little kitchen cabinet of folks, that will, he says instead of review the message, he says help plan the next one, which is a curious way of getting feedback, but also
that's how
looking
we train.
For it.
I used to train my guys on the back side. No help to them, no help to the people. I'm now training them on the front side, working with them on the front side of their word work, inquiring it ahead of time. Much more helpful
giving them
for
a good experience
and for the people.
The
other thing is the pastorals tell us how to train people. Two ways: you train them in the Word, and you train them in a way of life. That continues to go through. 2 Timothy 1:14. You're going to guard this deposit. That's a word thing, and you're going to follow in the apostolic way. Same thing happens in chapter 2 and in chapter 3. Your competency is going to be derived from your character and how you handle the word. That's all training that takes place in that. What's required is something like a ministry description, that's responsibility, mentoring, and content. And those things should be brought to bear on every internship program in a local church.
Okay, you identify, you train, you give opportunity, and then somebody falls on their nose. Then what?
Yeah, these are the interesting ones because, we've all fallen on our nose, right? So you need a few of those, but you're able to detect pretty early whether the guy falling on his nose is because of some occasional thing or because of some substantive thing.
Now, I'll press you both. Do you know who is the author of this quotation? There is no good preacher who is not moved almost to the point of tears at the end of every sermon at how poor was the message he just delivered? Who says that?
I don't know.
That's Spurgeon.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
gotta-
I just feel
gotta
like I know what he's talking about.
We all need to know that,
Yeah.
that a single bad message is not the end of a career.
Right.
Now,
And-
obviously, if one cannot ever reduplicate what seems to be a good model of preaching, but we do need to be able to help people to say, a single bad message does not destroy your future.
And there is probably something necessary for the development of the preacher in having a few of those. I mean, nobody escapes the school of humility, right? So you just pray. You pray it's not on Sunday mornings or not in a big
But
setting.
we
like
all
that.
have roles of training people, and we've said key things: give opportunities, give pre-training as well as post-evaluation, and then somewhere along the line say, sometimes I fail to.
Right.
And that helps people to know it really is the grace of God each of us is dependent upon as we're proclaiming the grace of God.
Let me say a practical word on the opportunities. One, we actually start services so that we create word opportunities. We've started a Holy Communion service weekly, and all the interns rotate and preach through it because we have to do that. We plant congregations because it opens up more preaching and teaching opportunities. So
Right.
a model of ministry that actually imbibes this is going to be multiplying is the
Right.
way in which you have to train.
Right, and then I think David, that's been a wonderful thing. I mean, even for our observing of what you're doing there. We have, maybe you do this too, we've added to that with the course that we're doing at Crossway for our interns and residents. We have a regular preaching laboratory kind of thing, and we're going through the pastoral epistles, so it's not artificial. I mean, you're purposefully creating these senses, these contexts, so it's not artificial. We're saying, of all of the audiences that need this, it's you guys. So preach to one another, bring the word to bear in one another's lives. That's been a very fruitful context.
Fantastic.
yeah.
Mike Bullmore, David Helm, if we can talk more and more how to do this, how seminaries and churches
Yes.
unite their efforts
Yes.
for the training of we know that's the best. It takes out the
Exactly.
artificiality, but
Right.
gives the best of training. This has
Absolutely.
been a delightful conversation. Thanks for the opportunity to talk again this
Yeah.
year.
Thanks, you guys. Yeah.